Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Emily Gold Mears is a woman on a mission for health. Her book, Optimizing Your Health, is a compendium of knowledge about health, healthcare, and the future of wellness. It all boils down to taking charge. How do we do that? Come listen to the conversation. Emily, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us the story behind your book, Optimizing Your Health.
Well, first of all, thank you, Pat, for having me here. The story behind my book is I used to be a lawyer, and I did not love the practice of law, and I was always interested in science and health and medicine. I continued my research first when my father became ill. I was fortunate enough to have a wonderful father. I thought he was the smartest person that I knew, and he got sick with vascular dementia. And that is a painful thing to watch a loved one die from this kind of a disease, a neurodegenerative disease, because it's a very slow and consistent demise. And it motivated me to see if I could find anything to perhaps slow the progression of his disease. I watched how the conventional healthcare system treated his condition, and truly I was horrified, because it was just about giving him one pharmaceutical after another, many of them working at cross purposes. And I thought there has to be another way. And I began researching, and what I found was truly quite grim, because what I learned is over the years, there have been billions of dollars allocated to drug development, and there have been many, many brilliant scientists and doctors who have devoted their lives to the research of these neurodegenerative diseases. And despite both of those things, there has been little or no meaningful progress whatsoever in terms of how to handle these diseases. And yet at the same time, the predicted numbers of people who are going to get and die from these diseases is growing exponentially. And I found that very grim and disillusioning. And so I began to broaden my research. Rather than just looking at what was available currently to deal with neurodegenerative disease, I thought, all right, I need to expand my research to see if there is anything that any of us can do to perhaps prevent the disease or maybe postpone the onset. I thought that at least is a goal that's a manageable goal. Postpone it for as long as possible. And what I found was quite heartening. It was optimistic, positive, and hopeful. And it encouraged me to continue my research. And what I learned is that, contrary to popular belief, there's a very small genetic component to most of these chronic diseases, neurodegenerative diseases being part of the umbrella of chronic diseases. Also included in that umbrella is cancer, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, and most of the diseases that we're all going to die from. And it turns out that the genetic component is a very small amount, perhaps 10%, it's written. So what that means is most of it is due to environmental and lifestyle choices. And I found that very hopeful, because we can modify certainly our lifestyle choices, a little bit less with our environment, but there are things that we can do to even improve our environment. And that means each one of us has to do these things. If we want to live a long and healthy life and postpone the onset of these diseases, it is somewhat within our control, contrary to what we're told.
That's so interesting. And I totally agree with you. Moving from whatever your lifestyle is now to this healthy lifestyle you may paint in your mind, where you have wonderful, nutritious, organic food, and you manage your stress, and you're connected with others, and you get exercise, it's actually a massive change and a massive move for most people to try to do that.
It is, but I don't want people to be overwhelmed. I have 19 chapters, 18 of which covers a unique and different concept. And I have action steps. And I don't mean to overwhelm people because I think that will be discouraging. The reality is, if you're very motivated, you can do everything, but you don't have to do everything. You can start small and slow. And I encourage people to, at the very least, do that because incremental changes, these small improvements, will yield results. And perhaps then, when those results occur and people begin to feel better, they will be incentivized to continue down the path and add to the incremental changes.
Absolutely. I'm a walking testament to that. I had some hip surgery. And of course, you go through physical therapy afterwards. And now I'm hitting the gym. And it is amazing over the course of a few months to see the progress and see how much better I'm doing in terms of strength, durability, flexibility. It works. Baby steps work.
Absolutely. Consistency, slow but steady, but consistent. You can't think of it. That's why I'm very against diets, because inherent in the term, one thinks that it's a temporary thing. And a diet it needs to be rebranded. The concept of diet should be rebranded because it's not a diet that one will do for a short duration. You have to change your lifestyle. And to do that, you have to change your mindset and just say, for my life, I'm going to approach things in a different way.
And I think you can have fun with it. One of the things I always say to people with regard to changing your diet, because food is so emotional for most of us, that just take one new thing. And I always pick on Swiss chard because I love it. And I didn't know what it was until I put it in my garden. I ended up with all this chard and I had to do something with it. But, try one new thing this week and just make it 3 times. If you don't like it, you never have to look at it again. But if you like it, well, incorporate it into your diet. And if you do that every week, in 26 weeks, assuming you like half the things, you have 13 new things in your diet, which means you have fundamentally changed your food choices.
Absolutely. It's a great idea. That's a terrific suggestion because what they found with the microbiome, they've done extensive research on the gut microbiome, is that diversity of diet is one of the very important things. And a lot of us, me included, for years ate the same thing all the time. And it became habitual. It was easy for me. And I realize now that's not good because you want to populate your gut with a diversity of bacteria. And the way you do that is multiple different vegetables and different, healthy foods. You want to eat as many different kind of vegetables as you possibly can. And there'll be great benefits from that.
Yeah, you talk extensively about gut health, and it's something we hear about in the media. Why is it so important?
Well, I'm a believer, and this is relatively new research, maybe the last 15 years. Prior to 15 years ago, there was little written and less discussed about the gut microbiome, but they're now finding that the gut microbiome is attached to everything. It's attached to your brain through your vagus nerve, which is the longest running nerve. And I strongly believe that if one has gut dysbiosis, which most of us do, and that is simply defined as an imbalance between good and bad bacteria. But until one can optimize, or at the very least improve their gut microbiome, they're not going to be successful in optimizing any other of their biological systems. So that to me is a good starting place. It affects your sleep. It affects everything when your gut is not optimized.
How do you know if it's not optimized, and how do you go about improving it?
Well, one of the ways you know is that you're not feeling as good as you used to when you were young. You have symptoms. Your sleep is disordered. You have brain fog. You don't have the same level of energy. You have a stomach ache. I mean, those are obviously more obvious symptoms. But the best way is, as I write about in my testing and tracking chapter, is to do testing because you may have these symptoms, but you can't identify specifically what's going on. And there's an adage which I like and adhere to, which is you cannot fix what you cannot measure. And an example of that is probiotics. People are recommending that everyone take probiotics because they're very beneficial for your gut microbiome. But the reality is, most probiotics have millions of strains of bacteria. And most of us have an abundance of certain bacteria and a deficiency of others. And if you randomly choose a probiotic, you may be feeding the bacteria that you already have an abundance of. and ignoring the bacteria that you're deficient in. And the way that you can avoid that is you do testing and you find out exactly what's going on in your gut microbiome. And I know the naysayers will say, oh, they're not 100% accurate, these tests. And I'm sure that that's true, but there's some data. They're better than no data whatsoever. And they kind of help you make certain choices that without the data, you would be making the choices blindly.
You know, one of the things I find so interesting is you have done extensive research on, I'll call them complementary modalities to allopathic medicine. And that alone is something that is such a huge topic that people just throw up their hands. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to turn. They don't know how to get tests like this because it's not a repertoire of most allopathic doctors. Talk a little bit about the broad spectrum of options that are available, and how can somebody go about making decisions and making sense of it all?
So that's a great question. I mean, there are many ways that someone can approach that issue. One is you can find a functional medicine doctor or a precision medicine doctor or personalized medicine doctor. They understand the utility and the value of testing first. Um, there are organizations that list these type of doctors in your area. And I would suggest that people do that. The other way, if you're a researcher, the way I am, is you can find a lot of these tests are now being available, being made available to consumers. And there are platforms where without a prescription, you can get these tests. They're not perfect. That situation is not perfect because collecting the data is one thing, and I believe strongly in doing so. But one needs to be able to interpret the data after they have collected it. And if you're doing the test, some of the platforms include an analysis of the results, and that's a great platform to subscribe to. Others, you just get the prescription for the test and you get the data, but it's hard to make sense of it because this stuff is quite complicated and very nuanced. So, ideally, you find a platform where you can do the test and they'll explain to you your results if you can't find a doctor who will help you out with this.
You know, there are a lot of modalities of medicine. One I think that has gained some traction in the last few decades is traditional Chinese medicine, including acupuncture in this country. What do you think about acupuncture?
I'm a big fan of acupuncture. I mean, I know that there are naysayers for that as well, but I kind of believe that it has been around for thousands of years. And I can't help but think if there was no value whatsoever, it would have disappeared. I cannot believe that something like that would have endured for this length of time if there was no value. I think the problem is that it's quite contrary to conventional medicine in America, and that which is contrary is eschewed unfairly. And perhaps it's because it's not understood, they're not taught about it, and so they just dismiss it wholesale without taking the time to appreciate it.
Yeah, personally, I'm a fan. I've used it from everything from tennis elbow to uh, chemo side effects, and I've had great success with acupuncture. I even set my cat up for some acupuncture when his arthritis got bad, and it seemed to help. I mean, he was a happy camper.
I believe.
So I think it's an excellent option. But again, you have to be curious. You have to be in a health situation where you want answers, or maybe it's dire and you need answers, in order to start exploring some of these other avenues, because the system does not make it easy to even know what's out there.
It's so true. That is so very true what you say. And I think what happens is that people have to get sick and they have to realize that the conventional healthcare system usually isn't going to help them. And that's when they begin turning elsewhere. My hope and my goal with writing this book is that people will not wait until they get sick. They won't wait until they become symptomatic, but rather they'll put methods in place before they get sick to postpone the sickness or to perhaps avoid the sickness.
Well, it goes to terrain theory too. And I'm a big believer in that. Again, it's rather contrary to allopathic medicine in that it implies self direction, it implies taking care of yourself. And actually, explain what terrain theory is to people.
Well, terrain theory is an ancient theory promoted by two French doctors, Louis Béchamp. And The concept of that is rather than treating from the outside, one treats from the inside. They use the example of a fish tank. If you have a dirty fish tank, you don't throw away the fish, and you don't put medicine in there, you clean the fish tank. And the same concept is applied to a human. You want to make sure that your terrain is as resilient as it can be, and therefore you'll be able to fight off diseases that come your way.
Inflammation plays a role in all this too. And I think that for many of us, we don't even realize we may have issues with inflammation. What can you do about that?
Well, there are a lot of things that you can do because inflammation, people need to understand that we all have a little bit of inflammation, acute inflammation. We would die without it. When you cut yourself, the way that you heal is that there's an acute inflammation response, and that results in healing. The problem occurs when your body doesn't shut off the inflammatory response, and the inflammation continues unchecked, and it becomes chronic inflammation. There's even a term called inflammaging, which is as we age, we have this sort of low level chronic inflammation, which does not serve us well. And there are a million things that people can do. They have to optimize your health, and you do so by everything, by your nutrition, by your exercise, by your sleep. You can take certain supplements to address that. Everything I write about will improve your inflammatory response, and it's an important thing to work on.
And stress is a piece of that too, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. And one has to acknowledge that everyone faces stress, and we will never live a stress free life. It's just part of being a human being. But what one needs to do is they need to modify their response to stress, and they have to reframe it in a way that it can be beneficial. Because once again, kind of like inflammation, there is a concept which I love called hormesis. And what that concept means is exposure to short acting acute stress creates an adaptive response by your body, which then results in increased resilience. So, small amounts of stress are, in fact, good for us. Cold exposure, heat exposure, high intensity exercise are all examples of hormesis that causes your body to adapt and become more resilient. Once again, it's the chronic, unchecked stress. And a lot of that has to do with state of mind. And we have to train ourselves, and it's not easy, to reframe our response to stress.
Yeah, I think the mind is a very big piece of the equation. I noticed in your book that you did not care for meditation as a stress reducing option. And for me, meditation has been game changing. I mean, I'm a total supporter of the idea of meditating. What was it about meditation that did not click with you?
Well, first of all, I have to make clear it's not that I don't like meditation because I have read so many clinical studies and looked at brain scans that confirm the value of meditation. I
Hmm.
believe in it strongly. It has been proven that it can lay down new neural pathways and reduce your stress. I once took a seminar that was given by a cognitive neuroscientist and a Tibetan monk. And we looked at all the studies, and they explain their own studies, which they had conducted on pre deployment soldiers that were about to be deployed to Afghanistan. And a lot of them felt that they were too macho and they weren't going to do this meditation thing, but several of them tried it. And when they were deployed, the ones who tried and instituted a practice of meditation fared far better during their extremely stressful lifestyle. And the ones who didn't do it watched them. And when they came back, they said, okay, sign me up. They wanted to do it. So I believe in the value. I really do. For me, it's hard to do. I tried it for a couple of years. I personally have a hard time quieting my mind. And I know that's part of it. I try. Mostly I think about doing it because I believe in it so strongly. But I've had to try other things to deal with my stress response. And what works better for me, it's a little easier for me, are breathing exercises. I think the result is similar, maybe not the same, but I can reduce my parasympathetic stress response by certain breathing exercises, and I can calm my nervous system down.
That's a really good point because anybody can do a breathing exercise. What
Yeah.
are some of the specific exercises that you do?
Well, there's something called a physiological sigh, where you take two deep breaths through your nose in, two quick breaths in through your nose, and then you exhale. And you make your exhale longer than your inhale, and you will know, you do a couple of those, you will absolutely feel your nervous system calming down. And that's a really easy thing to do anywhere and anytime. And then you can do box breathing, where you inhale for the count of four through your nose, you hold for a count of four, you exhale for a count of four, and then you hold the exhale for a count of four. People should know that a longer exhale will calm you down. And that's easy.
It is, and that's really interesting. I've run into a lot of these breathing techniques in yoga, actually, but you make such a good point. I don't really integrate them into my day to day habits. I meditate every day, but I really should integrate some of those breathing exercises because they really work.
They do. I live in Los Angeles where I'm always driving in the car and there's always traffic.
There's
And
always stress.
it's really stressful. Driving can be quite stressful in LA, and you can't believe some of the things the drivers do. Now, meditation while driving would not be something anybody would recommend, but it's amazing the positive impact of a couple breathing exercises, what they can do while you're driving during a stressful situation. So I would recommend that.
So many of these recommendations are informed common sense, if you will. If you do a little digging into what creates health, it is a pretty well defined path. Why don't more of us take that path?
Well, I think a lot of it is habits, and behavior is the wrinkle in this whole system. Behavior is very difficult to change. I mean, there's an entire new area of science, behavioral economics, which has emerged. That didn't used to exist. And they address the issues with behavior, and it's quite complex. Changing behavior is difficult. Habits, we become what our habits are, and once you establish bad habits, it takes an enormous amount of effort and discipline to alter your habits. It's well worth it, but it's hard to do.
But we do become our habits. You're so right about that. I'm forever reading things on neuroplasticity, the brain, how it works. And I think the key to changing our habits more than willpower is interacting with our brains actually and changing our patterns of thought.
Indeed. Absolutely. Indeed. It takes a little work. And our society has become, well, our attention span is not very long. We want a quick fix for everything. And when it comes to your health, there really isn't a quick fix. It took us years to become unhealthy. And so it's going to take a while to reverse those habits and to become healthier.
Yeah, no, I recently read a very interesting book by Jill Bolt Taylor. Yeah, you know who she is. She did that fabulous TED talk. For the people who don't know, she is a Harvard PhD. I'm not sure if she still holds that post, but she was involved in brain research. And she had a stroke, a severe left brain stroke. And she watched as her brain shut down. And she did a wonderful TED talk, and she has a wonderful book about that entire experience. But recently, she published another book called Whole Brain Living, I believe. And it's fascinating. She talks about, through the lens of both her professional experience as well as her personal experience, the different parts of the brain and how we can learn to interact with them for our best mental health and our best decision making. It's absolutely fascinating. And it goes to what we were talking about in terms of changing our behavior.
I bet that is interesting. I haven't read the new book, but I didn't even see the TED talk, but I read her book. It's called My Stroke of Insight. And
Yes.
it was unbelievable. I would suggest everyone, it was so amazing. And I think with the help of her mother, she was able to heal remarkably so. Because so many people that have a stroke to that degree, and she knew that she was having it, but she was unable to call for help. I mean, that's an amazing story. It really is, but quite inspiring as well.
Yeah, it took her 8 years to heal. And I recommend her new book to everyone. And her book brings up the point that there are some really promising areas of inquiry in health in general. What do you think are some of the most promising areas that are currently under investigation?
I think there are so many. I mean, unfortunately, in America, we're shackled by standard of care. And so some of these areas of inquiry are going to be stifled, I fear. Whereas in other countries around the world, Germany and Israel, to list two examples, they are not shackled by standard of care and litigation. And they're able to explore innovations in far more depth. But they're finding amazing things. I mean, with the gut microbiome, for one, with, as I talk about, the oral microbiome, genetics is an area of extreme interest to me. And while, yes, many of these areas, these diseases don't have a big genetic component, there is still phenomenal things to learn from having one's whole genome sequenced, particularly the omics, the areas of omics that come from genetics, and that includes proteomics, nutrigenomics, which is not advanced enough to rely on. But the one that people should pay attention to is pharmacogenomics. And what that is a field that looks at your genetic variants, which we all have many of, and it identifies which pharmaceuticals you will have a bad reaction to based upon your genetics. And this is fairly advanced, but needs to be in broader use because there are a lot of people who die every year annually because of anesthesia. Had they known this, had they known that their particular genetics predispose them to a harmful reaction or even certain drug interactions that they're prescribed, I believe in the future we're going to look back to the way things are prescribed, drugs are prescribed and anesthesia is administered. We're going to look at this as the dark ages and think, wow, so much of the harm could have been prevented if people had their genes sequenced and they looked into the field of pharmacogenomics. So that's an area of particular interest for me.
I, I remember reading, I'm not going to have the right term for this now, but that getting into sort of micronutritional counseling and awareness can also make a difference for many people.
Yes, I think what you're talking about is micronutrient deficiencies. And we are
Hmm.
all deficient in micronutrients. And that is something that you can do a test. And from the test, you'll learn specifically where you are deficient. And then you can treat the deficiencies because it segues into the supplement industry area on which I write extensively. Because the supplement industry, to me, is like the wild, wild west. It is, I think, a $200 billion industry and growing by leaps and bounds. And there are 14 big conglomerates that are buying up all the small supplement companies, many of which started with a pure mission to make a high quality product that wasn't filled with bad ingredients, because many of them add these things called excipients and fillers and binders to bulk up the capsule. And we don't need to be ingesting those. And then there are many of them where they've been tested and it's been revealed that the label has no bearing on what's actually in the tablet or the capsule. And the conglomerates are only concerned about their bottom line. And we found during the pandemic that everybody is encouraging everyone to take all these different vitamins and supplements. And I have a different approach that I haven't heard echoed in this area, which is do not take anything until you do your testing first. And that includes micronutrients, along with vitamins and minerals. You want to find out your amino acids and everything else. You want to find out what's going on, because to take something, testing is a little bit expensive, but the supplements are far more expensive, not only financially but to your health, because if you're taking things that you shouldn't be taking, you're harming your health and wasting your money. So if you spend a little money up front and you find out what your baseline is and you only treat where you're deficient, I believe you'll have a better outcome.
And that goes back to finding a functional medical doctor.
Yes, it does.
Are there any substitutes in naturopaths or any of the other medical specialties?
Well, yes, a lot of these people, one has to do their due diligence. They have to find out who's in their area, although some of the consultations can be done virtually. But yes, there are some naturopaths. There's a broad array of medical professionals who are understanding the utility of testing and treating holistically versus just treating the symptoms and trying to identify what the cause of people's symptoms are rather than just masking the symptoms.
You make that sound so matter of fact, but actually that's revolutionary in terms of the way we run medicine now. Looking to actually find the cause, the root cause, as opposed to just treating the symptoms.
It is, but doesn't it make sense? I mean, it's hard
Oh,
to, and sometimes that's hard. I don't want to overlook the fact that it can be hard to find the source. It really can. And perhaps there are instances where you may have to treat the symptoms. If someone is extremely uncomfortable or in pain, you may have to, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue down the path of trying to determine what the root cause is.
the first time I came into contact with with this sort of thinking and paying attention to your terrain was with David Servan Shriver. He wrote a book that was published, I think, in 2008 and republished in 2012. He's no longer with us, but he was a medical doctor who had brain cancer and when the cancer reoccurred, he went on a worldwide quest from a scientific perspective for what creates health. It's an amazing book. Just the footnotes alone are terrific reading. You would enjoy this book.
I'm
But
sure.
he talks about how important it is to treat our terrain, how important it is. He touches on supplements. He touches on all these items, and it almost seems to me like there's a call for a real medical specialty that looks at everything from the inside out. But it's not on the horizon, is it?
It is a little bit, and it's called, there's many different names. Each one is slightly different, though there is some overlap. There is functional medicine, there is holistic medicine, there is integrative medicine, there is personalized medicine, and there's precision medicine. And they're all a little bit similar, but also a little bit distinct. And personalized medicine, in my opinion, is the best approach. Now, it's not accessible for everyone. And I believe that with artificial intelligence advancing, one day perhaps it will be, but it will look at each individual on its own instead of recommending this one size fits all protocol, which the United States healthcare system is based upon. And if you think about it, I mean, I understand they have to do it because there are so many people and they want to address more people, but it's really not very helpful because it's based upon population demographics. And there is a substantial percentage of people who fall outside of the population and for whom that kind of medicine will not help at all.
I'm going to take a slight detour here in our conversation because I wanted to bring this up. Sugar. What is the story on sugar?
Well, I can speak on that because for most of my life, sugar was my favorite food group. I loved sugar. I mean, who doesn't? I think there are some people who don't, and I'm always fascinated by them. They tend to be salty people. But I loved sugar and consumed it with a vengeance for most of my life until I watched my father, who didn't have a terrible eating habit, but he liked cookies and he liked ice cream. He liked grapes, which are high filled with a lot of sugar. And neurodegenerative diseases are some of them are now called diabetes 3 because they find that there is a glucose component. There is nothing good that sugar does for us. There just isn't. And it's in everything. And there are people who think that if you use coconut sugar or maple syrup or any of these healthier types of sugar as opposed to refined table sugar, that it's okay. And perhaps occasionally it's better than the table sugar, but it's our body responds to these kind of sugars, maple syrup and coconut sugar and all of these things in the same way. Our body does not distinguish. We release glucose in response to consumption of those things in the same way that we do when we consume table sugar. So one has to be mindful and they have to make a decision. And I'm sure the best approach is balance. You cannot make it the mainstay of your diet. Perhaps you can have it occasionally, but one would be best to reduce their consumption of sugar.
What about artificial sweeteners?
Really bad, really, really bad. And I know that from my own experience. I love Diet Coke. And I put that awful artificial sweetener in my coffee and in my iced tea for years. I did it. This and what it does is it alters your taste buds too, the artificial
Yes.
sweeteners, because it's so intensely sweet that you get used to this very high level of sweetness and you want more. Your body adjusts to it. but those are really bad and have been associated with just a myriad of bad diseases. So I cut those out completely, and I suggest that everyone do the same. There's nothing good from those.
Now, when you cut sugar out of your diet, it's amazing. All of a sudden, an apple tastes super sweet.
Indeed. Yeah. You alter your taste buds. It's a habit change.
Are there any healthy alternatives in the synthetic sweetener world?
If one has to do it or it's too hard to make the change, I think that stevia is considered better. Monk sugar is another alternative. If you have to taper slowly before you alter your taste buds, maybe that's a better way to do it. But I shouldn't mention them by brand name, but the other ones in the other packets are really bad, and they're not
Just
doing
stay away.
anybody any favors.
If you were to give some advice to somebody who is really interested in tackling their health, what 4 or 5 steps would you give them to follow?
Let me think about that. Well, the first thing I would advise is that they have to be their own healthcare advocate. Gone is the day where we can rely 100% on our healthcare practitioner. It just is no longer possible. I mean, for one thing, the doctors are squeezed by the insurance companies. They only have 12 minutes or something to allocate to each patient, and most of the time is spent with their heads buried in their electronic health records. So, and the real issue is that they don't know you as well as you know you. Nobody knows your body better than you know your body. You know how you respond to everything. Good sleep, bad sleep, every food you eat, everything. You know what it feels like. And the doctor doesn't know to that degree. They know sort of a generic approach, but you want to listen to your body. You want to take control. At the very least, you want to become collaborative with your doctor. And if you can, if you're inclined, you want to do due diligence and you want to research and find out. And that research includes taking stock of how you react to things. So that would be my first thing. My second thing I would tell people, start with your gut. Figure out what's going on with your gut and try and make that as optimized as you possibly can. Do whatever it takes. Look at my book. I have some suggestions. If you can, find a doctor who specializes in this. But that's your first order of business. Because when that happens, I think you'll sleep better, your brain fog will diminish, you'll have more energy, and you'll be able to improve all the other symptoms. Now, I talk about the oral microbiome too. It's my first chapter because I believe that there is a correlation between oral health and systemic wellness. And you need to start there. So many oral health products have chemicals in them, even dental floss, toothpaste, mouthwash. There's really not a need to use mouthwash because most, if not all, mouthwashes contain alcohol and other chemicals that what they're doing is they are destroying all the bacteria on your tongue. We are made up of bacteria. We have to accept that. We have good and we have bad bacteria. And when one tries to destroy the bacteria, you're destroying all of the bacteria. And that makes you vulnerable. And you don't want to do that. So let me think. What are the other things? That's three. Sleep is critical. One can and should optimize their sleep. And there are ways to do that. I would stay away from the pharmaceutical sleep aids. Those might be a temporary fix, but they'll give you other long-term problems. And there are very simple fixes that have no bad side effects that one can and should do, like maintain a consistent waking up time and a consistent going to bed time. Consistency prevails over all of these systems. Sleep in a very dark room and as cold as you can tolerate, not freezing cold, but cold. Um, when you wake up in the morning, make sure that you go outside and you expose yourself to some kind of light. Don't look directly into the sun, but get some light, not directly in your eye, but on your whole self. And if you live in a cloudy environment or at a high latitude, the photons are strong enough to still penetrate through the sun to you, and you might have to stand out there a little bit longer. Or if you're really in a very cold climate or a high latitude, you can get these light devices that will duplicate. It's not the same as natural light, but that's a very beneficial thing that will reset your circadian rhythms. Um, and the other thing that they can do, well, there's so many things that they can do, but the other thing that I am really a believer in is light optimization. And where I live in California, and perhaps in other states, LED lights are mandated because they use less energy and they're better for the environment. And I'm sure that's true, but they're bad for our biology, really bad. The spectrum of light at night that's emitted from an LED, it enters our eye, hits our pineal gland through the retina, and it shuts off our production of melatonin and human growth hormone. And this blue light at night, during the day it's fine, but at night it's problematic. And it's emitting not just from our computers and our televisions and all of our screens, our phones and iPads, but from the LED light bulbs. And they're finding, there are studies, mostly in Europe, that are showing that not only do they do retinal damage, but they interrupt with your sleep and they're contributing to inflammation and diseases. So that's something that people should be mindful of.
Where can they find out more about your studies and find your book?
Well, I have a website, emilygoldmears.com, and social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, all my name, emilygoldmears.com. And my book is sold online wherever books are sold, Amazon, Walmart, Target, and it's in independent bookseller stores.
Optimizing Your Health is just an incredible compendium of information. And I would say for anybody looking to try to understand what some of the options are and what some of the considerations are in creating a healthier life, you want to check this book out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for recommending it. And I really enjoyed talking to you, Pat.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.